The tension in Trump Tower's boardroom was unlike anything the advisors had ever witnessed. This wasn't a political debate, nor a business meeting, nor a campaign strategy session. No, this was deeply personal. This was a father and son facing off, Donald Trump versus Barron Trump. A heated clash of ideologies. Both men weren't just fighting for the future of their relationship, but possibly for the future of America itself. Donald Trump, seated at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, radiated his signature dominance. Dressed in his iconic navy blue suit and that famous red tie, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on his son. His fingers lightly tapped against the desk, his mind working over the situation. Across from him, Barron Trump sat upright, perfectly composed, his hands clasped together. His face was a mask unreadable. Unlike his father, who often relied on sheer presence to command attention, Barron had something far more dangerous: conviction. The advisors around the table were unnervingly still. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others pretended to study their notes. They all knew one thing: when Donald Trump was challenged, he fought back. But this time was different. This time, it was his own son, staring him down. And Barron wasn't backing off. It was Donald Trump who finally broke the silence. "All right, kid," he said, his voice calm but carrying a firmness, like a general addressing a soldier. "Let's hear it. You've got a lot to say, huh?" Barron didn't flinch. "I do," he replied, his voice steady, controlled. Trump smirked slightly, leaning forward. "All right. Let's hear it. What's on your mind?" Barron took a deep breath. "America's changing, Dad," he said simply. Trump's smirk faded just a bit, a hint of concern showing in his eyes. "Changing how?" he asked, his voice still firm. Barron leaned in slightly, his voice unwavering. "If you don't change with it, you're going to lose them." A heavy silence fell. Someone at the far end of the table inhaled sharply. Trump's fingers stopped tapping. His eyes narrowed. "Lose who?" he asked, his voice cold, piercing. Barron met his father's gaze, unflinching. "The people who got you here," he said. "The ones who believed in you. The ones who trusted you." Trump tilted his head slightly, his eyes scanning Barron, as if weighing the truth of his words. "I still have them," he replied simply. "I still have more support than anyone else in this country." Barron didn't miss a beat. "For now," he said. The room shifted. The atmosphere became thicker, heavier. That wasn't just a response, it was a warning. Trump's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "You think you understand this game?" he asked, leaning in, sizing up his son. Barron locked eyes with him, his posture straight and sure. "I understand the people playing it," he answered. Trump scoffed. "Oh yeah? And what do you think people want, huh? You think they want me to start acting like one of these weak, apologizing politicians?" Barron shook his head. "They don't want you to apologize," he said, his voice firm. Trump raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but defensive. "Then what do they want?" Barron leaned in, his voice sharp. "They want you to listen." The advisors stiffened in their seats. This was dangerous territory. Donald Trump sat back, arms crossed, his expression growing colder. "I listen plenty," he retorted, his tone more defensive now. Barron shook his head again. "No, Dad. You talk. You dominate. You control. But you don't listen anymore." The air in the room thickened, as though time had slowed. A long pause stretched out. Trump narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping lower. "I listen," he repeated, his tone quieter, but still full of command. "I listen to the people who matter." Barron's lips pressed into a firm line. "And that's exactly the problem," he said. "You think some people matter more than others." Trump's nostrils flared, and he leaned forward, anger simmering beneath the surface. "That's called being a leader, kid," he shot back. Barron didn't blink. "That's called picking favorites." A sharp intake of breath came from one of the advisors. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was a reckoning. Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous." He looked at his son, eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "You think because you've been to a few fancy schools and read a few books, you know more than me?" Barron shook his head. No, he replied calmly, but I know what people feel. And right now, they feel like they don't matter. Trump froze for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, but Barron caught it. And that's when he knew he had made a mark. Barron leaned in, his voice quiet but resolute. You got elected because people believed in you, he said. You made them feel like they had a voice. Donald Trump studied his son carefully now. Like an opponent, he was still trying to figure out. Barron continued, but now, they feel like just another crowd at another rally. Trump's face hardened. I built this movement, he said, his voice thick with pride. Barron met his gaze, unwavering. I know, he replied simply. Trump's jaw tightened. No, he said, his voice rising. I built it from the ground up. I didn't inherit it. I didn't have it handed to me. I fought for it. Barron met his father's gaze unflinchingly. Then act like it. Silence descended again. A few advisors looked down, pretending to study their notes, trying to disappear into the background. One senior strategist shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his nervousness clear. Trump exhaled, rubbing his hands together as if trying to regain his composure. All right, he said, nodding. All right. Let's hear it then. Since you've got all the answers, what should I do? Huh? What's your big idea? Barron hesitated. For the first time in this exchange, he paused. This wasn't just idle chatter. His father had just called him out, and now he had to back it up. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and tense. Barron remained seated, his posture straight, composed, while Donald Trump stood by the door, his hand still gripping the handle. And for the first time in this entire exchange, Donald Trump hesitated, uncertainty creeping in as his son stared him down. The air was thick with unspoken words, a father and son at an impasse, their futures and the future of America, hanging in the balance.